I mean, I've seen some petty neighborhood dictators since I started Sovereign Justice, but Brenda literally tailing a garbage truck with a literal silver stopwatch is, honestly, just a whole new level of unhinged. Like, who even has that kind of time on a Tuesday morning? Anyway, let's just dive into it.
"Look, Brenda," I wheezed, clutching my right flank like I'd just taken a sniper round to the kidney, which honestly wasn't far from the truth. I was literally in the hospital yesterday, having a jagged calcium rock the size of a Ford Focus laser blasted out of my urinary tract. I physically could not drag the plastic tub up the driveway. Brenda didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just adjusted her sun visor, a piece of blindingly white plastic that perfectly matched the blindingly white, spotless fiberglass of her custom golf cart. She looked down at me from her vinyl throne, a clipboard resting casually on the steering wheel. "Rules are rules, David," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of saccharine sweetness usually reserved for speaking to toddlers who have just soiled themselves. That'll be $150. She handed me a laminated pink slip. Laminated. Because God forbid the Arizona sun fade the ink on my financial punishment. Welcome to the Desert Oasis Homeowners Association in Scottsdale, Arizona, a place where the sun is always shining, the grass is always a mandatory, drought-defying shade of emerald green, and the fines flow like water from a broken sprinkler head. I moved here 6 months ago, thinking I was buying a quiet piece of suburban paradise. Instead, I accidentally enlisted in a beige-colored authoritarian regime. Everything in Desert Oasis is beige. The houses are beige. The gravel is beige. I'm pretty sure the neighborhood dogs are contractually obligated to be beige. And reigning over this monochrome kingdom was Brenda, the HOA president, a woman who treated the CC and Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, like they were handed down on stone tablets on Mount Sinai. But the crown jewel of Brenda's oppressive rule book? The 3-minute rule. I didn't even know it existed until my second week. I had rolled my city-issued 96-gallon blue trash bin down to the curb at 6 a.m. before leaving for work. Standard suburban procedure, right? Wrong. I came home at 5:30 p.m. to find my first pink slip taped to my garage door. Violation, Section 4, Paragraph B. Receptacles must be promptly returned to an enclosed structure by the homeowner or an authorized agent within 3 minutes of municipal servicing. 3 minutes. I thought it was a typo. I thought it was a joke. Who is home at 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday to aggressively snatch their garbage can the second the truck drives away? I called the HOA management company, assuming a rational human being would answer the phone and laugh with me about the absurdity of it. "It ensures the aesthetic continuity of the streetscape, sir," a monotone voice had told me over the phone. "Fines double with each subsequent infraction." That was strike 1. Strike 2 was the kidney stone incident. That was the $150 hit. I was broke, I was in pain, and I was starting to get paranoid. How did they know? How did they know exactly when the truck came and how long the bin sat there? I needed answers. So I did what any sane, increasingly radicalized homeowner would do. I went to an electronics store, bought a motion-activated trail camera designed for tracking elk, and painted it beige. I spent 3 hours that night perched on a ladder, zip-tying the camera deep inside the thorny arms of the massive saguaro cactus in my front yard, angling the lens perfectly toward the curb. The following Tuesday, I waited. I was at work, agonizing over the fact that my bin was out there, exposed, vulnerable. When I got home, I sprinted to the cactus, retrieved the SD card, and shoved it into my laptop. What I saw on that grainy 1080p footage broke my brain. At 10:22 a.m., the massive, rumbling city garbage truck rolled into frame. Its mechanical arm reached out, grabbed my blue bin, hoisted it up, dumped the trash, and slammed it back down onto the pavement. The truck hissed, shifted gears, and began to pull away. And right behind it, trailing no more than 20 feet back, was Brenda. She was in her golf cart. She pulled up right next to my freshly emptied bin. She lifted her left hand. The sun glinted off something metallic. I zoomed in. I enhanced. It was a stopwatch. A literal, old-school, analog stopwatch. She clicked the top button, stared at my house for exactly 180 seconds, and then cheerfully whipped out her clipboard. I sat in my home office, staring at the screen, a cold realization washing over me. I wasn't fighting an HOA. I was fighting a maniac with too much free time and a golf cart. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. I was working from home, right in the middle of a massive, high-stakes Zoom presentation with my boss and 3 regional directors. My screen was shared, I was sweating through my dress shirt, and I was mid-sentence explaining quarterly projections when I heard the distinct, hydraulic crunch of the garbage truck outside. I glanced at the clock on my monitor. At 11:15 a.m., panic spiked in my chest. I had 3 minutes. So, as you can see in the next slide, I stammered into the microphone, my eyes darting frantically toward the front window. The Q3 metrics are... Excuse me, I need a glass of water. Dry throat. David, we have 10 minutes left, my boss barked through the speakers. Power through. I couldn't leave. I was trapped. I watched the clock in the corner of my screen tick. 11:16, 11:17, 11:18. At 11:29 a.m., the Zoom call finally ended. I ripped off my headset, sprinted through the house, threw open the front door, and practically dove down the driveway. There it was, fluttering in the dry Arizona breeze, taped securely to the lid of my blue bin. A laminated slip. But this one wasn't pink. It was blood red. Final warning. Section 4, Paragraph B violation. Home fine assessed. $500. Failure to pay within 14 days will result in a lien placed against the property. 14 minutes. It had been out there for 14 minutes. $500 for 14 minutes of plastic on concrete exposure. I stood there in the blistering heat, my neighbor's pristine lawns mocking me, Brenda's tire tracks still visible in the dust near the curb. A normal person would have just paid it. A normal person would have set an alarm, or hired a neighborhood kid, or capitulated to the beige regime. But I'm not a normal person. And this is when I decided that compliance wasn't going to cut it anymore. I was going to comply with their rules so hard, so maliciously, and so flawlessly that it would tear the very fabric of Desert Oasis apart. I went back inside, poured myself a tall glass of ice water, and pulled up the Desert Oasis HOA Master Rulebook on my computer. I needed to find a weapon. I Control-F'd my way through the 300-page document, searching for Section 4, Paragraph B. I read the sentence again and again. Receptacles must be promptly returned to an enclosed structure by the homeowner or an authorized agent, I leaned back in my chair. What defines an agent? The rulebook didn't specify that the agent had to be human. It didn't specify it had to be a biological entity at all. It just had to be authorized by me to return the receptacle. I didn't need to run out there. I needed the bin to run itself. Now I am a lot of things, I'm stubborn, I'm petty, and I have a great credit score. But I am not an engineer. If I tried to wire a motor to a trash can, I'd likely just burn down my driveway. I needed a mercenary. I needed someone who operated outside the bounds of polite society and HOA jurisdiction. Enter Wyatt. I found him on a hyper-local, slightly shady online classifieds board under the heading Custom Robotics / Drone Repair / Will Build Anything for Cash. Wyatt operated out of a massive, unair-conditioned rented garage in a dusty industrial park on the outskirts of Tempe. When I pulled up, the bay door was open, blasting heavy metal music into the parking lot. Wyatt was hunched over a workbench, soldering wires onto what looked like a toaster oven attached to tank treads. He was maybe 22, wore a t-shirt that said, "I void warranties," and looked like he hadn't slept since 2018. "So," Wyatt said, not looking up from his soldering iron as I walked in. The air smelled strongly of ozone, burnt plastic, and then stale energy drinks. "You're the guy who wants to weaponize a trash can." "I don't want to weaponize it," I clarified quickly, waving my hands. "I just want to motorize it. I need it to move from the curb to my garage." Wyatt finally looked up, his eyes twitching slightly behind thick safety glasses. "That's boring, man. I could mount a pneumatic t-shirt cannon on it. Shoot garbage right back at the truck. I could put spinning blades on the wheels. BattleBots style." "Wyatt, no. No blades, no cannons. I live in an HOA. If it shoots garbage, they'll seize my house. It just needs to roll." Wyatt sighed, looking deeply disappointed. "Fine. What's the payload?" "Municipal solid waste. Maximum 96 gallons. "And the activation trigger?" "Remote control, or ideally a timer, but remote is fine. I just push a button from my window, and it drives itself up the driveway into the garage." Wyatt walked over to a corner of his shop, kicking aside a pile of dismantled hoverboards. He pulled out a massive, heavy-looking motorized wheel assembly. "Electric wheelchair motor. High torque, low speed. Can carry a couple 100 pounds easy. We mount 2 of these to a reinforced steel plate, bolt the plate to the bottom of your city bin. We wire it to an old deep-cycle marine battery, hook up a basic RF receiver, and give you a remote." "How much?" I asked. $800? Cash? Plus the cost of the steel plate." "Done," I said, handing him a wad of bills I'd pulled from the ATM that morning. "How soon?" "Give me 3 days. And bring me the bin." 3 days later, I was back in Wyatt's shop. Sitting in the center of the concrete floor was my city-issued blue bin. But it was changed. It was elevated about 4 inches off the ground. Underneath it sat a crude, heavy steel undercarriage, housing a massive battery and 2 thick, knobby wheelchair tires. Wires snaked up the back of the plastic bin, duct-taped in place, leading to a small black antenna. "Behold," Wyatt said, wiping grease off his hands. "Project Trash Former." "It's hideous," I breathed, utterly captivated. "It's functional," Wyatt corrected. He tossed me a small black remote control with a single red button. "Press it." I pressed the button. Immediately, a loud, high-pitched mechanical whine filled the garage. Whir, grind, whir. It sounded like a blender trying to puree rocks. The bin jerked forward, wobbled violently, and then began to roll. It was slow. Agonizingly slow. I walked next to it, easily outpacing it with a casual stroll. "Top speed is about 0.2 miles per hour, Wyatt shouted over the grinding noise. The wheelchair motors were geared for torque, not speed. You want it to move 300 pounds of garbage up a slight incline, it's going to take its sweet time. I watched the monstrous blue plastic box inch its way across the garage floor. It veered slightly to the left, corrected itself with a loud clunk, and kept grinding forward. "Wait," I said, a massive grin spreading across my face. "How long will it take to go 30 feet?" Wyatt did some quick mental math. At this speed, assuming no major obstacles, probably about 15 to 20 minutes. My smile widened into a manic grin. The HOA rules didn't dictate how fast the bin had to be returned. And they only dictated that it had to be in the process of being returned within 3 minutes. If my bin was physically in motion, actively navigating back to the garage, Brenda couldn't do a damn thing. And she would have to sit there, in her pristine white golf cart, watching it loudly, obnoxiously, and incredibly slowly grind its way up my driveway for 20 agonizing minutes. "Wyatt," I said, patting the hard plastic lid of the bin. "It's perfect." I loaded the heavy, modified bin into the back of my rented pickup truck and drove it back to Desert Oasis under the cover of darkness. I hauled it into the garage, plugged the battery into a wall charger, and waited for Tuesday. Tuesday morning arrived, and honestly, I woke up feeling like a kid on Christmas. As if Christmas involved a 300-pound mechanized trash receptacle and the impending psychological destruction of a middle-aged woman named Brenda. I rolled out of bed at 5:30 a.m. It was already like 80 degrees outside because, again, Arizona is just an oven with property taxes. I opened the garage door and looked at the beast. I had filled it with exactly 3 bags of regular kitchen trash, and, just to give it some good weight for traction, an old bag of potting soil I found in the shed. I grabbed the remote, held my breath, and pressed the red button. Whir, clunk, grind. The bin lurched forward, its knobby wheelchair tires biting into the smooth concrete of my garage floor. I guided it out, walking backwards down the driveway, steering it with the little joystick Wyatt had wired into the remote. Yet it was literally the least stealthy vehicle on the planet. It sounded like 2 skeleton warriors fighting inside a metal dumpster. I carefully navigated it down the 30-foot slope of my driveway, lined it up perfectly against the beige curb, and shut off the power. From the street, it looked completely normal. Just a standard municipal blue bin. But underneath? Pure, heavy-duty, low-speed malice. I went back inside, made a dangerously strong pot of coffee, and set up my command center at the front window of my home office, hidden behind the wooden blinds. I pulled up the live feed from the trail camera hidden in the saguaro cactus on my monitor, just for a secondary angle. And then I waited. 4:14 a.m. Like clockwork. The ground began to vibrate before I even heard the engine. The massive, Atus Orange City garbage truck lumbered around the corner, its hydraulic brakes screaming in protest. It pulled up parallel to my house. The mechanical arm reached out like a giant metal-praying mantis, clamped around the middle of my beautifully sabotaged bin, and hoisted it into the air. I actually held my breath. I mean, I was terrified the sheer weight of the steel undercarriage and the marine battery would rip the plastic bottom right out of the bin, sending battery acid and coffee grounds all over the street. But Wyatt had apparently used some serious industrial bolts. The bin inverted, the trash dumped, and the arm slammed the receptacle back down onto the asphalt with a massive rattling thud. The truck hissed, released the air brakes, and rolled away. I looked at the monitor. Less than 10 seconds later, was gliding silently from around the corner of Desert Oasis Boulevard, came the pristine white golf cart. Brenda. She parked exactly 5 feet away from my bin. She didn't even look at my house. She just reached into the cup holder of her cart, pulled out the silver analog stopwatch, and clicked the top button. Tick, Robotic. I sat in my office chair, sipping my coffee, watching her on the monitor, and looking out through the slats of my blinds. I set my own timer on my phone. The HOA rule was 3 minutes, 180 seconds. 1 minute passed. Brenda pulled out her clipboard and uncapped a red pen. She was practically vibrating with excitement. She had me. She knew I was home, she saw my car in the driveway, and she was ready to issue a fine that would probably pay for the landscaping committee's annual retreat. 2 minutes passed. Brenda started filling out the top of the pink laminated slip. Date, time, violation code. She was writing so aggressively I could almost hear the pen scratching from inside my house. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Brenda looked up from her clipboard, staring directly at my front door, waiting for me to come sprinting out in a panic. She raised her left wrist, ready to click the stopwatch. 2 minutes and 50 seconds. I picked up the black remote control from my desk. I smiled. Honestly, it was a dark, twisted kind of smile. The kind of smile a cartoon villain gets right before they pull the lever on the doomsday machine. 2 minutes and 55 seconds. I pushed the red button. Out on the curb, the blue bin violently spasmed. Gronk, screech, whir! The sound echoed through the quiet. A beige cul-de-sac, like a dying industrial air compressor. Brenda literally jumped in her seat, dropping her red pen onto the floorboard of her golf cart. She stared, wide-eyed, her mouth hanging open in a perfect O of absolute shock. The bin rotated about 10 degrees to the left, the heavy rubber tires scraping loudly against the asphalt, and then it began to move. It didn't roll. It marched. It ground its way up the slight incline of the driveway apron at a blistering speed of maybe, I don't know, 0.2 miles per hour. It was glorious. Brenda scrambled out of her golf cart. She took 3 steps toward the bin, then stopped, holding her hands out like she was trying to calm down a wild animal. "What is that?" she shrieked, looking around frantically, as if searching for the wizard controlling it. "What is happening?" I nudged the joystick on my remote slightly to the right to keep it centered on the driveway. The bin responded with a loud mechanical clunk and shifted course, continuing its agonizingly slow crawl toward the garage. Brenda looked at her stopwatch. 3 minutes had passed. She looked at her clipboard. She looked back at the bin, which had successfully traversed exactly 18 inches of driveway. "You're in violation!" she yelled at my front window, her voice cracking. "It's past 3 minutes!" She marched up to the bin, pen in hand, ready to slap the pink slip onto the plastic lid. But as she reached out, the bin kept moving. It bumped gently into the toe of her pristine white tennis shoe, and just kept grinding its wheels, pushing against her foot with relentless, low-speed, high-torque determination. Yet she gasped and jumped back like it had bitten her. "It's moving!" she yelled to nobody in particular. I mean, the street was empty, but she was broadcasting to the universe. I watched, utterly fascinated, as her brain tried to process the HOA rulebook in real time. Receptacles must be promptly returned to an enclosed structure. Was it returning? Yes. It was physically traversing the driveway on a direct vector to the garage. Was it prompt? Well, that's subjective, isn't it? It was actively in motion. She couldn't cite me for leaving it out, because it wasn't left out. It was in transit. Brenda stared at the grinding, whining blue box for another full minute. It had covered maybe 3 feet. She looked at her golf cart, looked at the bin, and then reached into her pocket and pulled out her cell phone. She dialed with aggressive, rigid jabs of her index finger. I knew exactly who she was calling. And honestly, I was thrilled. 15 minutes later, the bin was roughly halfway up the driveway. It was taking a little longer than Wyatt estimated because the driveway had a slight grade, and the left wheel kept catching on a particularly stubborn expansion joint in the concrete, causing the bin to pivot and loudly scrape itself back into alignment. A white Scottsdale Police Department SUV rolled slowly down the street and parked behind Brenda's golf cart. The driver's side door opened and a cop stepped out. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing dark aviator sunglasses and an expression of profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. His name tag read Martinez. I decided this was my cue. I opened my front door and stepped out onto the porch, at holding a coffee mug and trying to look as casual as a guy operating a remote-controlled trash robot could possibly look. "Officer!" Brenda shrieked, marching over to him and pointing a shaking, manicured finger at my driveway. "Thank God you're here. Look at this. It's a rogue vehicle. It's endangering the neighborhood. It assaulted my foot." Officer Martinez took off his sunglasses, squinted in the bright sunlight, and looked at the blue bin. The bin was currently lodged against a tiny decorative pebble, its left wheel spinning uselessly and screaming loudly before catching traction and lurching forward another inch. Martinez stared at it. Then he looked at Brenda. Then he looked at me standing on the porch. "Ma'am," Martinez said, his voice deep and entirely devoid of urgency, "that is a garbage can." "It is motorized," Brenda yelled, or waving her clipboard. "It is an unauthorized structural modification to his property, it is operating without a license plate, and it is violating Section 4, Paragraph B of the Desert Oasis Master Deed." Martinez let out a long, slow sigh. He walked up the driveway and stood next to me. He was close enough that I could smell the spearmint gum he was chewing. He folded his arms across his tactical vest and just watched the bin. We both stood there in silence for a solid 60 seconds. Grind, whirr, clunk, grind. The bin crept past us, smelling faintly of old coffee grounds and ozone. "So," Martinez finally said, not taking his eyes off the plastic lid, "how fast does it go?" "0.2 miles per hour, officer," I said casually, taking a sip of my coffee. "Geared for torque. Wyatt down in Tempe built the undercarriage. I used wheelchair motors." Martinez nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "Wheelchair motors. Smart. Good torque on those. You running it on a marine battery?" "Deep cycle," I confirmed. "Should last a few weeks on a single charge." "Nice," Martinez said. He pulled a small notebook out of his breast pocket, completely ignoring Brenda, who was now hyperventilating on the sidewalk. "Does it have a reverse?" "Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm afraid to try it." "Probably smart," Martinez agreed. He turned around and walked back down the driveway toward Brenda. "Arrest him!" she demanded, her face now a terrifying shade of plum. "Or confiscate that machine! It's a public menace!" Officer Martinez put his sunglasses back on. "Ma'am, there is no state law against a man putting wheels on his own garbage can on his own private property. Well, it's not a motor vehicle, it's not on a public roadway, and it's moving at a fraction of a mile an hour. It couldn't run over a sleeping turtle." "But the HOA rules," she sputtered, holding up the laminated pink slip like a holy relic. "The police department does not enforce homeowner association bylaws, Brenda," Martinez said, and the fact that he used her first name told me this was definitely not the first time he had been called out here for her nonsense. "This is a civil matter. If you don't like his trash can, take him to small claims court. Have a nice Tuesday." He got back into his SUV, rolled the window down, and looked up at me. "Hey," he called out. "Make sure you charge that battery in a ventilated area. Don't want it off-gassing in your garage. Will do, Officer Martinez. Stay safe. He drove off. As Brenda stood on the sidewalk, completely alone, her ultimate weapon, the police, having entirely failed her. She stared at me with a look of such pure, unadulterated hatred that I actually felt a chill in the 85-degree heat. She stomped back to her golf cart, slammed her clipboard onto the passenger seat, and sped off down the street. I looked down at my bin. It was only 3/4 of the way up the driveway. I sighed, sat down on my porch step, and spent the next 20 minutes watching my mechanical child successfully and loudly complete its maiden voyage into the garage. I hit the garage door clicker, sealing it inside. Phase 1 was complete. But I knew Brenda. She wasn't going to let this go. The escalation had just begun. Over the next month, Trash Day in Desert Oasis became a literal spectator sport. A word gets around in a beige neighborhood where the most exciting thing that usually happens is someone planting an unauthorized agave succulent. By week 3, when the garbage truck rolled through at 10:15 a.m., there would actually be a small crowd of neighbors standing casually on the sidewalk, pretending to walk their dogs or check their mail. And every week, I gave them a show. I started getting creative. Because the remote control was manual, I didn't just drive it straight up the driveway anymore. I started doing maneuvers. I would drive it in a slow and zigzag pattern, maximizing the time it spent on the concrete. One week, I intentionally drove it onto a small patch of decorative gravel bordering the driveway, just to see what would happen. What happened was that the bin got hopelessly stuck for 45 minutes, and its heavy rubber wheels spinning and throwing tiny beige rocks everywhere while producing a noise that sounded like a bandsaw cutting through a metal pipe. And Brenda? Oh, Brenda was always there. She couldn't find me. She knew the police wouldn't help her, so she resorted to psychological warfare. She would park her golf cart at the end of my driveway, set a lawn chair on the sidewalk, and just sit there with a pair of binoculars, watching the bin's agonizingly slow progress, waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for the battery to die so it would be stranded, technically left out, so she could finally issue the citation. But Wyatt's battery held strong. The kids in the neighborhood started calling it the Blue Beast. A teenager 3 houses down actually flew a drone over my driveway to film it one morning. I became a local legend, the guy who broke the HOA's unbreakable rule through sheer mechanical stubbornness. But the hammer had to fall eventually. You don't embarrass a suburban dictator and get away with it forever. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, about 5 weeks into the deployment of Project Trash Former. I was checking my mail when I saw the thick, cream-colored envelope. It didn't have the standard Desert Oasis HOA return address. It had the embossed logo of Sterling, Vance, and Associates, Real Estate Litigation. I opened it in my kitchen, my stomach dropping slightly. It was a cease and desist order. 4 pages of dense, aggressive legal jargon. The letter claimed that my unauthorized motorized apparatus was not, in fact, an agent returning a receptacle, but rather an unapproved, hazardous structural modification to the exterior aesthetics of the property. They cited obscure bylaws about maintaining the peaceful auditory environment of the neighborhood, claiming my bin violated noise ordinances, which, honestly, fair enough, it sounded awful. But the final paragraph was the kicker. Failure to immediately dismantle the apparatus and return to standard manual receptacle compliance within 72 hours will result in maximum daily fines of $500, retroactive to the date of first deployment. Furthermore, the HOA board will initiate proceedings to place a lien upon the property located at my address for unpaid fines and legal fees, up to and including foreclosure proceedings. They were threatening to take my house. Over a garbage can. I sat at my kitchen island, as the heavy paper crinkling in my hands. The joke was over. The physical comedy of the slow-moving bin wasn't going to protect me from a team of corporate lawyers who specialized in crushing homeowners. Brenda had escalated from the stopwatch to the nuclear option. I felt a brief, terrifying wave of panic. Maybe I should just take the wheels off. Maybe I should just pay the neighbor kid $20 a week to run the bin up the driveway. I could afford it. It would be easier. But then I pictured Brenda's smug, terrifyingly beige face. I pictured her sitting in that golf cart, stopwatch in hand, lording her petty authority over a neighborhood of terrified people just trying to live their lives. No, absolutely not. I started sovereign justice for a reason. You don't beat these people by backing down. You beat them by outreading them. Not you beat them by finding the one obscure, ironclad rule that trumps their entire rulebook and shoving it down their throats. I made another pot of coffee. It was 9 p.m. I opened my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and went to the official website of the Arizona State Legislature. I needed a loophole. I needed a legal shield so strong that a team of real estate lawyers couldn't pierce it. I started searching through state statutes regarding HOAs. Arizona actually has fairly robust homeowner protections, but HOAs still have massive power over aesthetic and nuisance rules. The lawyers were right about the noise clause. They could probably get me on that. I needed to redefine what the bin was. If it wasn't a garbage can, what was it? A vehicle? No, it wasn't street legal. A toy? No, it was performing a function. I fell down a rabbit hole of Arizona transportation law. I read through definitions of motorized skateboards, electric bicycles, and mobility scooters. Nothing fit. At 2:15 a.m., my eyes burning and my third cup of coffee completely cold, I stumbled onto a section of the Transportation Code that had been quietly updated a few years prior, heavily lobbied by tech companies operating out of Phoenix and Tempe. I clicked the link. Title 28. Transportation. Chapter 3. Article 15. Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS, Section 28-1225, Personal Delivery Devices. I started reading. My heart rate began to climb. A personal delivery device, PDD, is defined as a powered device operated primarily on sidewalks and crosswalks and intended primarily for the transport of property on public rights-of-way, and that does not transport passengers. Okay, my bin transported property, garbage. It didn't carry passengers. It was powered. I kept reading, scrolling down to the operational rules. A personal delivery device may operate on pedestrian areas, sidewalks, and crosswalks within the state. And then I found the Holy Grail, the silver bullet, the legal nuke. It was buried in subsection D of the statute. D. A local authority shall not regulate the operation of a personal delivery device in a manner that is inconsistent with this article. A local authority shall not prohibit the operation of personal delivery devices within its jurisdiction. I practically leapt out of my chair. Local authority legally included municipalities, counties, and crucially under Arizona case law regarding state-level preemptions, quasi-governmental entities like homeowners associations. As an HOA cannot enforce a restrictive covenant that directly violates a state law specifically designed to protect a certain activity or device. This is the same legal mechanism that prevents HOAs from banning solar panels or satellite dishes. State law expressly protected the operation of personal delivery devices, and state law expressly forbade local authorities from banning them. My motorized trash can wasn't an unauthorized structural modification. It wasn't a noise violation. It was a state-protected, legally recognized personal delivery device. I started laughing. In the dead silence of my house at 2:30 in the morning, I laughed until my ribs ached. But I needed to make it official. I couldn't just walk into a courtroom and claim a garbage can was a delivery robot. I needed a paper trail. And I spent the next 3 hours navigating the labyrinthine website of the Arizona Department of Transportation. Sure enough, there was a quiet, barely used subportal for registering experimental autonomous and remote-controlled PDDs, mostly used by college engineering students and food delivery startups. I filled out the forms. Device manufacturer, custom fabrication, Wyatt's Garage. Gross weight, 150 pounds, empty. Propulsion, electric motor. Maximum speed, 0.2 miles per hour. Primary cargo, municipal solid waste. Delivery route, from municipal curb collection point to residential enclosed structure. I paid the $45 registration fee with my credit card. I hit submit. Immediately, an automated PDF generated on my screen. Was an official State of Arizona Department of Transportation temporary registration certificate for a Class 1 personal delivery device. It had a barcode. It had an official state seal. I printed out 5 copies. The next day, I didn't reply to the lawyer's letter. I didn't dismantle the bin. Instead, I went to a hardware store and bought a roll of heavy-duty reflective yellow caution tape and a small magnetic orange flashing hazard light. I spent Friday evening turning the blue bin into an official, state-sanctioned piece of delivery infrastructure. I wrapped the caution tape around the middle. I superglued the flashing orange light to the lid. And most importantly, I used heavy-duty clear packing tape to affix a copy of the ADOT registration certificate squarely to the front of the plastic bin, those right where anyone standing in front of it would be forced to read it. I was ready. The trap was set. All I needed was for Brenda to take the bait. Tuesday rolled around. The tension in the cul-de-sac was palpable. Word had leaked out that the HOA lawyers had sent me a letter, and the neighborhood rumor mill had determined that today was the day I would be forced to capitulate. At 10:10 a.m., I took up my position at the window. The truck arrived. It grabbed the heavily modified, caution-taped bin. The garbage men actually paused and pointed at the flashing orange light I had activated before rolling it out, laughing among themselves before dumping it and placing it back on the curb. The truck left. Enter Brenda. She didn't just pull up in her golf cart today. She pulled up aggressively, while parking the cart diagonally across the end of my driveway, physically blocking the apron. She stepped out, crossing her arms, a look of supreme, victorious arrogance on her face. She didn't even have her stopwatch. She was just waiting for me to come out and drag the bin inside manually, surrendering to her power. I waited exactly 2 minutes and 50 seconds. I pushed the red button. Whir, grind, clunk. The bin lurched to life. The orange light flashed brilliantly in the Arizona sun. The bin began its slow, relentless march toward the driveway. Brenda flinched at the noise but quickly recovered her composure. She stood her ground next to her golf cart, blocking the path. "Turn it off, David!" she yelled, her voice echoing down the street. Several neighbors had already stepped out onto their porches to watch. "You received the letter. In Germ, this illegal apparatus is being fined $500 a day. Turn it off and bring it in manually, or I'm calling the lawyers right now." I didn't turn it off. I steered the bin directly toward her. It crept closer, 10 feet, 8 feet, 5 feet. Brenda didn't move. She thought I was playing chicken with a remote-controlled trash can. She thought I would blink. I didn't blink. I guided the bin right up to the front bumper of her pristine white golf cart. Bump. The heavy steel undercarriage of the bin hit the fiberglass bumper of the cart. And because Wyatt had geared those wheelchair motors for pure torque, the bin didn't stop. It just kept trying to drive forward, its rubber wheels spinning aggressively against the pavement, pushing against the golf cart with a horrendous grinding sound. "Hey!" Brenda shrieked, was legitimately panicked now. She slapped the top of the bin. "Turn it off! You're damaging HOA property!" I stepped out of my front door, holding a manila folder, and walked calmly down the driveway. I didn't bring the remote. I left it on the windowsill, locked in the forward position. "Morning, Brenda," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the screaming electric motors. "Turn this hazard off immediately," she demanded, pointing at the spinning wheels leaving black marks on the concrete. "I am detaining this unauthorized modification until the police arrive. You are in violation of the cease and desist." "Brenda, I can't turn it off," I said, shaking my head sadly. "It's an automated delivery in progress. You're actually interfering with a state-registered supply chain." She stared at me like I was speaking ancient Aramaic. What are you talking about? It's a garbage can!" "Not anymore, Brenda." I tapped the clear plastic sleeve taped to the front of the bin. "As of Friday, this is an official State of Arizona Class 1 personal delivery device. You can read the registration right there." She squinted, leaning down to look at the official ADOT certificate. Her lips moved silently as she read the words, State of Arizona and personal delivery device. "This is fake," she snapped, standing back up. "You printed this off the internet. It's a trash can." "You can scan the QR code with your phone if you'd like," I offered generously. "It takes you directly to the Department of Transportation database. It's fully legal, and more importantly, it is fully protected by ARS. Section 28-1225. I opened the manila folder and handed her a highlighted copy of the state statute. "I suggest you read subsection D, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping the conversational tone and taking on the sharp, precise edge of sovereign justice. The part where it explicitly states that a local authority, which includes this HOA, shall not prohibit or regulate the operation of a personal delivery device. State law preempts your rulebook. Brenda looked at the paper. She looked at the flashing orange light. She looked at the bin, which was still relentlessly trying to push her golf cart out of the way. "Furthermore," I continued, taking a step closer, "by using your vehicle to physically barricade a registered PDD on a public right-of-way, you are technically committing a civil infraction against a commercial delivery service. I'm operating this device under my LLC. You're detaining my cargo." "Cargo?" she sputtered, gesturing wildly at the bin. "It's empty. It's an empty trash can." "The cargo," I corrected smoothly, "is municipal air, which is being transported to my garage for testing. It's proprietary." Brenda's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. The absolute absurdity of the situation, combined with the impenetrable wall of highly specific legal bureaucracy I had just erected in front of her, had completely short-circuited her brain. "Now," I said, checking my watch, I'm going to go back inside. I'm going to leave the bin running. If it damages your golf cart because you refuse to move it out of a legally protected delivery route, my LLC will be holding you personally liable for damages to the PDD's chassis, plus an hourly delay fee of $200 for interfering with the delivery. I turned my back on her and started walking up the driveway. "You can't do this!" she screamed after me, her voice breaking. "I'm the president of the HOA!" I paused, looking over my shoulder. "And I'm a registered freight operator, Brenda. Move the cart." I walked back into my house, closed the door, and went straight to the window. Outside, Brenda stood frozen for a long, agonizing minute. The bin continued to grind against her bumper, the motors whining in protest, the orange light flashing mockingly in her face. The neighbors were openly laughing now, pointing from their lawns. Slowly, defeatedly, Brenda walked to her golf cart. She got in, put it in reverse, and backed away from my driveway. Freed from the obstacle, the blue bin lurched forward, crossed the threshold of my property line, and began its slow, victorious, incredibly loud crawl toward the garage. Brenda sat in her cart, watching it go. She didn't write a ticket. She didn't pull out her stopwatch. She just hit the accelerator and sped out of the cul-de-sac, disappearing around the corner. But I knew this wasn't the end. The HOA board meeting was exactly 2 weeks away, and Brenda wasn't the type to lose in public without trying to scorch the earth behind her. She was going to try and humiliate me in front of the entire neighborhood. She was going to try. But I had a whole manila folder full of state statutes, and I was just getting warmed up. The Desert Oasis Clubhouse is exactly what you'd expect from a neighborhood that enforces a mandatory beige color palette. It smells like aggressive indoor chlorine, stale Folgers coffee, and the lingering despair of 1,000 petty arguments over property lines. I walked in at exactly 6:55 p.m. on the second Tuesday of the month. The monthly HOA Open Forum. Usually these things are attended by maybe 4 people who just want to complain about a neighbor's wind chimes. But tonight, the parking lot was literally overflowing with golf carts. It was standing room only inside the rec room. Half the neighborhood was there, crammed into uncomfortable folding chairs, whispering loudly. I mean, I felt like a gladiator walking into the Colosseum, if the Colosseum was air-conditioned to 62 degrees, and the emperor was a woman named Brenda, holding a gavel she bought on Amazon. Brenda was sitting at the center of a long folding table at the front of the room, and flanked by 2 other board members who looked like they honestly just wanted to go home and watch Jeopardy. But the real threat was sitting to Brenda's immediate right, a guy in a charcoal gray suit that definitely cost more than my first car. He had slicked back hair, a phenomenally smug expression, and a leather briefcase resting on the table in front of him. The corporate attack dog from Sterling, Vance, and Associates. I took a seat in the back row, resting my thick manila folder on my knees. I didn't say a word. I just waited. At exactly 7 p.m., Brenda slammed her wooden gavel down so hard I thought the table was going to crack. "The monthly meeting of the Desert Oasis Homeowners Association is now called to order," she announced, her voice booming through the small room. She didn't even bother with the usual minutes or treasurer's report. She zeroed her eyes directly onto me, sitting in the back. "We have an emergency disciplinary hearing on the docket. David, please step up to the front." Every single head in the room swiveled to look at me. I stood up, smoothed out my button-down shirt, and walked down the center aisle. I stopped about 5 feet from the board's table, crossing my arms. "So," I said, leaning casually on my back foot. "What's the emergency, Brenda? Somebody paint their mailbox off-white?" A few suppressed chuckles rippled through the crowd. Brenda's face tightened. "This is not a joking matter," she snapped, pulling out a stack of papers that looked terrifyingly thick. You have been operating an unauthorized, hazardous, or motorized contraption on HOA property in direct violation of a legal cease and desist order. This board is moving to formally sanction you, finalize the daily fines of $500 dating back 14 days, and initiate the lien process on your property. 14 days, I repeated, doing the math out loud. So, $7,000. Over a garbage can. "It's not a garbage can anymore," Brenda practically yelled, losing her composure for a second. "It's a nuisance. It's a structural modification. It's a menace." The lawyer in the charcoal suit placed a manicured hand over Brenda's wrist, gently stopping her tirade. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked at me with the kind of condescending pity usually reserved for roadkill. "Mr. David," the lawyer began, his voice smooth and heavily practiced. "Well, my name is Arthur Vance. I represent the Desert Oasis HOA. I drafted the cease and desist you chose to ignore. Now, I understand you think you've found some clever little loophole by bolting wheels to municipal property, but I assure you, you haven't. The CC and Rs you signed upon purchasing your home are a legally binding contract. Section 4, paragraph B is clear. Furthermore, the noise, the visual disturbance, and the physical hazard this machine presents gives the board absolute discretionary power to fine you to the maximum extent of the bylaws. We have it all documented. We have the video footage your neighbors have so helpfully provided." He tapped a flash drive sitting on the table. "So, here is how this is going to go," Vance continued, leaning forward on his knuckles. "You are going to agree, on the record, right now, to dismantle the apparatus tonight. You will pay a reduced settlement of $2,000 to cover our legal fees, and we will waive the lien. If you refuse, we file the paperwork tomorrow morning, and I personally guarantee you will lose your house before Thanksgiving." The room was dead silent. I mean, you could literally hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. That was a heavy threat, a real life-ruining threat, delivered with absolute, chilling confidence. I looked at Vance. I looked at Brenda, who was practically glowing with vindicated joy. I let the silence hang for another 10 seconds. "Honestly," I said, opening my manila folder, "that is a very generous offer, Arthur. Truly. I guess I just have a couple of questions for the record before I sign anything." Vance sighed, looking at his gold Rolex. "Make it quick. We have a strict agenda." "Right. So just to be crystal clear," I said, pulling out a piece of paper, "you are officially fining me and threatening foreclosure, specifically because of the motorized device I used to transport my municipal waste from the curb to my garage, correct? That specific device?" "Yes," Vance said slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly like he sensed a trap but couldn't quite see the tripwire. "The unauthorized motorized structural modification. And the HOA board, acting as the local governing authority for this neighborhood, is officially using its power to prohibit the operation of this device on the sidewalks and pedestrian areas of Desert Oasis?" "Obviously," Brenda chimed in. "It's banned. Period." "Perfect," I smiled. It was a big, genuine, sovereign justice smile. Thank you for getting that on the official meeting audio, Brenda. I really appreciate it." I took a step forward and dropped 3 copies of a heavily highlighted document onto the table. One in front of Brenda, one in front of Vance, and one in front of the confused treasurer. "Arthur," I said, my voice losing all the casual, messy filler words. "As a real estate attorney, I'm sure you're intimately familiar with the concept of state preemption, right? The legal doctrine where a higher authority of law displaces a lower authority when the two are in conflict." Vance didn't answer. He picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the highlighted text. "What I've just handed you," I announced, turning slightly so the crowd behind me could hear, "is a copy of Title 28, Chapter 3, Article 15 of the Arizona Revised Statutes, specifically on Section 28-1225, the state law governing the operation of personal delivery devices." I watched Vance's eyes hit the highlighted paragraph. I watched his pupils dilate. "Now, according to the state of Arizona," I continued, pacing slowly in front of the table, "a personal delivery device is any powered device intended for the transport of property on pedestrian areas. My device transports property. Garbage. It is powered. Therefore, under state law, it is a PDD." "This is ridiculous," Brenda scoffed, not even looking at the paper. "It's a trash can." "Brenda, please," Vance muttered, holding up a hand. He was reading very, very fast now. A slight sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. "But the really fun part," I said, pointing a finger at the document in Vance's shaking hand, "is subsection D. I'll read it aloud for the room. Just a local authority shall not regulate the operation of a personal delivery device in a manner that is inconsistent with this article. A local authority shall not prohibit the operation of personal delivery devices within its jurisdiction." The room was so quiet, I could hear the lawyer swallow heavily. "Under established Arizona case law, homeowners associations are considered quasi-governmental local authorities subject to state transport preemptions," I stated, locking eyes with Vance. "You literally cannot ban my robot, Arthur. State law explicitly protects its right to operate on my driveway and the neighborhood sidewalks, and state law overrides your beige little rulebook." This statute was written for Amazon drones and Postmates rovers," Vance stammered, his slick confidence entirely evaporating. It was not a garbage can glued to a wheelchair." "The statute does not specify the aesthetic quality or the corporate origin of the device, Arthur," I shot back. "It only specifies its function. And legally, my bin is a state-protected commercial delivery vehicle." I reached into my folder and pulled out the second piece of paper. The official Department of Transportation registration with the state seal. I slapped it down right on top of his legal pad. That is the official ADOT registration for a Class 1 PDD, registered to my LLC, I said. "It is fully legal, fully sanctioned, and fully immune to HOA jurisdiction. Now, you sent me a cease and desist demanding I dismantle a protected commercial vehicle. You have spent the last 14 days harassing a registered supply chain operation." Brenda looked at Vance. "Arthur, what is he talking about? Shut him down!" Vance didn't look at her. He was staring at the state seal on the ADOT registration like it was a live grenade. He was a real estate lawyer. He knew instantly that I had him completely, undeniably dead to rights. If he tried to take this to court, a judge would throw it out with prejudice and probably sanction his firm for frivolous litigation against state code. "Well," Vance said, clearing his throat and hastily loosening his silk tie, "it appears there may be a jurisdictional overlap here that requires further review." "There's no review needed, Arthur," I said cheerfully. I pulled the third and final piece of paper from my folder. "Because I'm not just here to defend myself. I'm here to collect." I slid the paper across the table to Brenda. "What is this?" she demanded, in looking at the document. "That," I said, "is an invoice from my LLC to the Desert Oasis Homeowners Association." I turned to the crowd again. "You see, last Tuesday, Brenda used her HOA-issued golf cart to physically barricade my registered personal delivery device while it was mid-route. Under Arizona commercial transport law, interfering with a registered delivery service carries a baseline civil penalty. I've also billed the HOA for unlawful detention of commercial cargo and an hourly delay fee of $200 for the 30 minutes my robot was trapped against her bumper. I tapped the bottom of the invoice. The total comes to $1,450, payable in 30 days. If you fail to pay, my LLC will place a mechanic's lien on the clubhouse. The crowd erupted. Someone in the back actually started clapping. That's a guy a few rows deep yelled, "Get him, David!" Brenda looked like she was going to hyperventilate. She slammed her hands on the table. "I am not paying this. I am the president. We fine you. You don't fine us." She looked wildly at Vance. "Arthur, do something. Sue him for the noise. Sue him for emotional distress." Arthur Vance, the shark in the charcoal suit, the man who had threatened to take my house 10 minutes earlier, slowly closed his leather briefcase. He clicked the brass locks shut. "Brenda," Vance said quietly, but the microphone picked it up. "The board needs to dismiss the fines." "What?" she shrieked. "He has a state registration, Brenda. If we proceed with the lien, we are violating state transportation code. It's a massive liability. The firm cannot support this action." Vance stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and looked at me. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of pure, grudging, professional respect. "Well played, David," the lawyer murmured. And then, he literally walked away. He walked down the center aisle, pushed open the double doors, and left the building. Brenda was left sitting alone at the center of the table, her ultimate weapon having just abandoned her in front of the entire neighborhood. She looked down at the highlighted statute. She looked at the ADOT registration. She looked at my malicious compliance invoice. The silence stretched on. It was beautiful. "Brenda," I prompted gently, leaning over the table. "The fines." She glared at me with an intensity that could have melted lead. Her jaw was clenched so tight I thought her teeth were going to shatter. Slowly, with trembling hands, she picked up her wooden gavel. "The board," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "The board moves to dismiss all citations against the property against David's property. The matter is closed." She banged the gavel. It sounded weak, defeated. "And the invoice?" I asked. We will forward it to accounting for review," she hissed, refusing to make eye contact. "I appreciate your prompt attention to the matter," I smiled, gathering my papers and sliding them back into the manila folder. "Oh, and Brenda, just a heads up, I ordered a new set of tires for the PDD. They're technically designed for off-road ATVs, so they might be a little bit louder on the concrete, but, it ensures the cargo gets to the garage safely." I didn't wait for her response. I turned around and walked back down the aisle. Had the crowd parted for me like I was Moses splitting the Red Sea of beige suburbanites. People were grinning, high-fiving me as I passed. The reign of terror wasn't completely over, but the 3-minute rule was officially dead and buried. I walked out into the warm Arizona night, the smell of chlorine fading into the crisp desert air. The next Tuesday morning, at exactly 10:14 a.m., the garbage truck rolled through. It dumped my bin and drove away. I stood on my porch, holding a cup of coffee. I waited 3 full minutes just to savor the moment. There was no white golf cart. There was no stopwatch. The street was completely empty, save for a few neighbors sitting on their porches, waiting for the show. I pulled the little black remote from my pocket. I pushed the red button. Whir! Grind! Clunk! The blue beast lurched to life, its orange hazard light flashing brilliantly in the morning sun. It spun its heavy, knobby tires against the asphalt, caught traction, and began its agonizingly slow, incredibly loud, 0.2-mile-per-hour march toward the garage. It was the most beautiful sound in the world.